was an Olympic athlete, an athlete who competed in the Olympics, who in a previous competition didn't do very well, and made a comment on their social media about how it was their style that the judges don't score favorably, and complaining about why people from this style don't win or don't score. And my response to that type of thing is do better.
G'day guys, it's Shane from Karate Over Coffee with another special guest, Michael Hagen from Apex Performance Karate. Did I get that right? No. Apex Karate Performance. I should have written it down, but mate, this is a podcast, a very professional podcast. So
absolutely, I'm only guests on professional podcasts.
Yeah, well, you'll get your money very shortly. Don't worry.
Yeah. I'll send you my PayPal link here shortly.
Yeah, it's all the sweet money we get from running podcasts. Now I did steal that sweet podcast reference from another podcast, another karate one.
Yeah, we want to make sure that we get proper attribution.
That's correct. I think it was the Karate Cafe.
Karate Cafe. Okay.
Sweet money. So yeah, because they're rolling it just like you and I. You run your own podcast.
Yeah, I started a podcast earlier this year, and I'm still waiting on my check to clear. So we'll see how much sweet money I get. But
yeah, it'll be in there shortly, mate. Don't worry.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It's the merchandise. That's where we make the serious cash.
You'd be surprised.
Because I've sold 2 shirts and a mug now. They are flying off the shelves. But so for those who don't,
the t-shirts that we buy ourselves, does that count?
Oh yeah, I have 10 of those, so I'm down money. I'm negative hundreds of dollars plus the camera, the microphone, the storage, parking it, the 10 hours a week I spend on it. Like I'm just rolling in the cash.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, for those who don't know you, Michael, do you want to give yourself a quick intro?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, my name is Michael Hagen. I'm the head coach here at Apex Kata Performance. Was a previous U.S. national team member a long time ago, competed in Team Kata, bronze medalist in the 1999 Pan American Championships in Havana, Cuba. After stopping my personal competition, I transitioned kind of to Okinawan Kobudo, Yamane-ryu specifically, which is one of my focuses still today is Yamane-ryu, and I practice Shima-Ha Shorin-Ryu karate under Oshiro Toshihiro sensei, currently living in Okinawa. He was living in the United States for a long time. A few years ago, I started Apex Kata Performance, and the concept behind that is to have an avenue to help people who want to compete at the next level for them, or at a higher level, whether it's at the national level or at the international level, whether they want to compete in WKF events or try to get on the national team. And I've been working with athletes from a variety of different styles, athletes in several different countries right now, predominantly in the United States, but we have one athlete that I work with in France. I have an athlete in China, an athlete in Japan, and we're just trying to help everybody realize their goals as they move forward.
Now I'm humbled that you asked me to be one of your athletes, but I'm just too old now, mate. I'm too old to do
well, that. Age is a state of mind, and you may just keep that thought. You may hear more about that later.
Yeah, well, maybe my body is that of an 80-year-old. So that I know on another podcast you're talking about when people mimic their 80-year-old sensei and they do an 80-year-old karate. Unfortunately, I've got a young-looking face, but my body is an 80-year-old, so I feel sorry for my students.
Yeah,
but
I understand.
Yeah, well, one of the things that really intrigued me and why I wanted you to come on is one. I mean, the Olympics just wrapped up. If you're listening to this, this is maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks after the Olympics. And also the fact that you practice Shorin-Ryu and Shima-Ha Shorin-Ryu, but you still coach elite kata athletes for competition kata.
Yep.
It doesn't sound like they work together, but you do. So first question is, let's just talk about the Olympics.
Okay.
First, what were your thoughts?
Overall, in general, not just kata competition.
Yep.
You know, well, first of all, I have to, kind of pimp my own Apex Kata Performance podcast. So just last week, I believe I released a after action report podcast. So you should definitely go check that out. You can find it.
I've listened to it. Yeah.
All of your favorite podcasting platforms, but so definitely go check that out. But in general, I think it was a success. I believe that it was a good representation of where WKF level karate is right now. Was it perfect? No, absolutely not. I think that it also provided the example or the ability for we to step back for the WKF to see what's working and what can be improved. In my podcast, I talked about some of the successes and some of those issues. And I was a kata athlete. The majority of my athletes are kata athletes, and so that's kind of my big emphasis. And for the most part, I thought the kata was very well. And you can see, especially if you followed the qualifying journey, if you will, over the last couple of years. And then if you really look at the Paris qualifying event in June, was a big one for me. You can see a big skill gap, if you will, between the people who competed in the Olympics and pretty much everybody past 10 or 15 down on the rankings. I mean, there's some other ones, but when you start to get down there, you can actually see the big disparity. And so, if we were talking about competition for kata, I think overall it was a success. Some of the things that you highlighted in your podcast, for example, the what was your phrase? Smoldering looks, streaming ki and stuff. I agree with that completely. That when I'm speaking with my athletes, a lot of my athletes are younger, in their mid to late teens or early 20s, and so they are.
I just want to point out, I'm not saying everybody did that. Not everybody did. I mean, there was only a couple of people who did it.
Right. And so you're absolutely right. And so, and let me just, I'm going to come right back to that in a second. So, but I've had where my athletes who look up to some of these athletes mimic that type of behavior.
Yeah.
Mimic the squinting eyes and the stare, and I almost have to scold them in the dojo or when we're training to knock that off. That's a theatrics that doesn't belong in karate. And you can do good karate and you can do good kata without those theatrical elements.
Yeah.
As witnessed by, like you said, not all of them did that. And if you look at on the male side, we had Kuna did some, but somebody who didn't was Ali from Turkey.
Yeah.
Right. Shotokan practitioner, had almost no embellishments or exaggerations. He just did a straight, clean, strong Shotokan kata. He had good facial expressions. He had good movement, and it was a nice, clean kata. On the female side, a good example is Grace Lau from Hong Kong, who had very minimal, exaggerated faces or exaggerated squinting eyebrows or anything like that.
I really I loved her movement. It was so clean. I was really surprised. I hadn't heard of her before, but man, I thought she was great.
So Grace, I will say that Grace is one of my favorite athletes to watch. I first started watching Grace in 2017, maybe 2016 or 2017. And I remember I think it was a Salzburg Premier League event, to where she beat all three of the top Japanese athletes. You know, that's the level of competition that she brings. And so it was great to watch her. But she, like I said, she was one of the good examples, and Ali was an example without a lot of those exaggerations or embellishments. So I think those were some of the successes. You know, also like in your podcast, you mentioned, you know, the stomping, and, you know, that has become, that comes predominantly, I think, from the influence of some Ryu Kata, where that's part of their their principles, their concepts of power generation. However, it has been overly exaggerated. When you look at what they're doing, like Kyuna does not stomp unnecessarily. There's not a lot of that excessive stomping, but it's become over exaggerated because people think that he's just stomping when he's actually not. So
when both feet are landing at the same time, wow,
or he's putting his foot down and he's doing it, but he's not stomping his back foot, for example. And you can still get that what their concept of power generation is. You can still accomplish that technique. So, you know, Kumite overall, I think was good. You know, it comes back to, again, a lot of refereeing. There's a lot of, like I talked about on my podcast, there's a lot of room for improvement in the refereeing. There was, obviously, you've probably seen some of the hubbub. The last match of the day of the competition was the plus 75 finals between the Iranian and the Saudi. And what I have to say is I actually don't, it's a tough call for the judges, and I actually think that it was the right call based on the rules that we have. And, you know, some people say, well, he was faking or doing whatever. And I don't believe that he was faking, because when there was contact, he dropped immediately. It was not, I mean, it was an instantaneous drop. People say it was Mubobi, and, you know, whether he was going in, I didn't see it that way. I've looked at the videos multiple times. I've looked at screenshots or still shots, and, you know, I don't think it was Mubobi. Like, he was intentionally charging in to get his face kicked.
Well,
so I mean,
whatever the end result was going to be, whether he gets disqualified or doesn't get disqualified, there was always going to be a loser, and there was always going to be contention.
Right. So, and so even more than that, even more than the final call, what my issue with is that in the very first scoring point technique of the match,
the
hook kick that hit the back of the shoulder, right? I referenced that in my, to me, that's a bigger concern than because that's 3 points right there, right? I mean, that set the tone of the match, and that would have been the deciding thing for a technique that didn't even score, didn't even come close to the head. And yet all 4 flags went up. And then it's being highlighted over and over again on the television in slow motion when they show the replays. And so to me that highlights a larger systematic flaw.
The slow motion wasn't a friend of karate. Whether it's kata or kumite, especially in kumite, where you see the fist, the massive glove, the huge glove going past the target and still getting scored. Right. But I don't have an answer.
So that's where, you know, and again, on that one, I don't have the answer. I think it comes back to training by the judges. What I don't want to see is like Taekwondo style sensors and pads, because that just technique. So it comes back to the ability of the judging, excuse me. As far as kata slow motion, we joked about it a lot, but one thing that I will say is, in some ways, the slow motion is not your friend. However, I would challenge anybody to go out and do their kata in front of those type of cameras, and then slow it back, slow motion, and tell me how it looks like. If somebody is going full out, like doing their best kata that they've ever done in their life, and it's better than what the Olympic athletes were, then absolutely.
Well, the karate according to a lot of the critics out there, their kata is better. So, you know.
Well, and that's where, again, I would challenge, okay, get a step away from Facebook and go out, do some training and set up some high definition cameras and record yourself and play it back in slow motion.
From that slow-mo, I've actually started using it in my classes to look at the movements, just because from the naked eye looks pretty good, but when you put it in slow-mo, the elbow starts coming out or the fist is turning too early. So it's actually been a really great tool for me.
So absolutely. If you've watched any of my other videos or podcasts, listen to my podcast, whatever, you'll know that I'm a big fan of video recording. I was just training with one of my athletes on Wednesday, and I told him that I wanted him to start recording himself every other day or every 2 days and go through and look. I record myself frequently. Yeah, and I see things that I'm doing
for karate.
For karate, yes. I mean, we won't talk about my OnlyFans website. That's later.
Yeah, that's where the sweet money comes.
Yeah. That's where. How can I afford to do all this? Yeah, it's onlyfans.com/. So, I catch things that I do myself frequently by recording it and then actually going frame by frame. If I'm doing it on my phone, I will sit there and I'll scroll through frame by frame, or I'll put it on my laptop and I'll go frame by frame. And I've caught where I'm, and depending on what I'm focusing on mentally when I'm doing my training, if I'm thinking about how my body moves and I'm not connecting my arm or my shoulder, and then my arm does something different. A few months ago, for example, I'll use this. I went on a work trip, and I went to the hotel yoga room, and I was set my camera up to record a couple kata, and I was doing it. And I mean, obviously, it was for social media posts. That was the whole purpose, right? So, I mean, who needs to train? It's just got to look like I'm training.
Look, but if it's not on Facebook, did it really happen?
Did it really happen? Did it really happen? No. I mean, and Facebook, really, come on. Only old guys use Facebook. It's all for Instagram or something. Right?
Damn it. Sorry.
But when I was doing that and I went back and looked and was like, well, first I was like, well, I can't use that on my Insta. I can't use that on my Insta. But more importantly, I saw how I was doing something. I was moving my body one way, but I wasn't focused on what my arm was doing. And so my arm was coming out almost, my elbow was separating from my body. My arm was coming out, and then my body would move. And then my arm was still there, like hanging there in space. And then I would try to punch. Yeah. And so when I saw that on the video and I realized that I had done it in a couple of videos, then I was like, okay, stop. Let me go back. And now I have to retrain. I have to think about it. I have to work through this movement again to fix that.
Well, I think when I'm listening to your podcast as well, a lot of it is self-correction. And if you can't self-correct yourself. If you can't do self-correction, then you're really going to struggle if your end goal is, as an elite athlete, or even to win a local or state or national competition.
So you're absolutely right. And I talk about that a lot also. I term it self-awareness of both of what you're physically doing. And that is also there's a learning curve involved with that. You have to know what you're looking at first. If you don't know what you're looking at and you just look at what you're doing, you're like, oh yeah, I'm doing what Sensei told me, I'm doing just fine. And so there has to be that initial awareness. And that's what I try to instill in my athletes when we're training, is I give them the concepts and I talk about those details. And then once they understand what those details or those concepts are, then they can do it on their own. One thing that I ask my athletes a lot of, well, how did it feel that time? Did it feel different than the time before? Oh yes, it felt much smoother or much easier. I felt much more relaxed on that time. And so it's not so much just about the technique itself, but it was how they physically felt when doing it as compared to, or after the correction, versus compared to how it felt when they were doing it, I would say, incorrectly or not very efficiently.
And that's, so those concepts and principles and movements are how you teach elite athletes, regardless of if they're Shitoru or Shotokan or Goju background.
Yes, exactly. And so, like I said, I do Yamane Chinenryu Bojutsu and Shima-Ha Shorin-Ryu. Originally, I started in Shito-Ryu. But my athletes and people that I've trained have come from a variety of backgrounds. Several are Shito-Ryu. Some are Okinawan Goju-Ryu. One was originally Shorinkan Shorin-Ryu, so more Kobayashi lineage rather than the Matsubayashi lineage that I come from. And so depending on what they're doing, what kata they're doing, and I've even trained a couple of Shotokan people. And so depending on what they're doing, what I'm talking about may not be style. I try to avoid somewhat style specific things, but things that can be concepts to improve body mechanics or biomechanics, how to move more efficiently within that.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because what I think a lot of, well, there's no politics in karate, which is fantastic, but there's a lot of things, you know, if we're learning a kata that was 100 years old, we have evolved 100 years in understanding biomechanics, body movement, yet a lot of traditionalists, and whatever that word is or whatever that means for you might be different for you, me, and Freddie down the road. But if we're not improving in that 100 years, then we're doing kata that is 100 years old without fully embracing the way that we have learned how to move more efficiently.
So yes, I agree completely. So again, we joked about, I like to use analogies.
Yeah.
So if you look at I can't remember the exact time off the top of my head, but if you look at the 100-meter, the men's 100-meter Olympic final from back when the modern Olympics started, I believe it was in 1920 something.
Yep.
That person probably wouldn't win a high school or a college championship in the United States today.
Yeah, sure. Yep.
Right? Physically, we've changed. Our nutrition has changed. We've improved our knowledge of sports science, on biomechanics, how to run. And so the speed at which the human being can run, even that short distance, has increased dramatically when we're talking about, for example, that that elite level. And so, yet, when we apply that concept to karate, everybody wants to lose their mind.
Yep.
Oh no, we can't apply, modern science or modern biomechanical concepts to karate because that's not how my teachers learned it when the monk brought the sacred training scrolls down from the mountain and then bestowed them upon my sensei. And so when
that's my sensei too. We must have the same sensei.
It's entirely possible that our sensei was all the same. Yeah. But these traditionalists, and I have no sympathy with that way of thinking. You even highlighted it. I train Okinawan Kobujutsu. I train Yamane-Ryu. Sometimes I think my Yamane-Ryu, I put more emphasis on my bo than I do on my karate kata. And yet I teach elite level athletes who want to be on the national team.
Yeah.
One of my athletes won first place in team kata at the U.S. National Championships in 2019 and got first seed at the U.S. team trials. Wasn't able to compete because of that year because of the Rona and everything.
Yep.
That same time, one of my athletes made it on the junior national team, and this year, nationals is in 2 weeks for us at the very beginning of September, and I have an athlete that has a very good chance of placing or medaling in both, in hopefully juniors as well as seniors.
Yep.
So, and yet I'm also teaching karate to my daughter who's in high school, and we don't do any competition style kumite or sparring. For her, it's straight self-defense and bunkai related things. You know, one of our last training days, we were doing, you know, blocking to trapping to palm strike to the throat to a takedown to an armbar.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there's a dichotomy there, but
the concepts and principles are the same. The body
concepts and principles are the same, and so, but we don't apply. We you know, kind of back to what you were originally talking about, is people start to lose their mind when we try to apply that to karate. Well, we do this way because this is the way I was taught. Yes, but do you know why you were taught that way? When people talk about how they're moving, well, this is how we move. Well, people don't understand why they're moving the way they're moving. They don't understand or they don't care, or they haven't researched to think about when, well, we move this way because our style does this and we came this way. Well, the reason that you were moving was because that way is because karate was introduced into the university system in Japan, which was very militaristic, that they had instituted throughout Japan. They had instituted a Western way of movement, a Western type of military drill and physical training, because when they abolished the samurai class, the people who were previously commoners wanted to, and they brought in all these Western military concepts into their physical training, and the schooling was a process through the university and this, you know, earlier school, and then what we would call elementary or high school now and then into university. And so all of these things had a significant influence on karate's development. And we all know, you know, Itosu Sensei changed it for introduction to the Okinawan school system in 1904, 1905. And then it made further change away from what I would describe, or perhaps like what my sensei would describe as traditional bujutsu way of movement. When you talk to traditional bujutsu practitioners in Japan, a lot of them don't consider karate as a real bujutsu or a real budo martial art. They consider it strictly a sport because of the way movement is being done. And so when people don't understand why they're moving the way they're moving, or how an alternative way of movement might be, martially speaking, more efficient or more practical, and I hate that word as it relates to karate also, they're not willing to accept it because that's not how we do it.
Yeah.
For example, I'll give you an example.
Of course you will, yeah.
The way we turn, or I'm sorry, for example, if you, let's go, you know, Fukugata Ichi or Kihongata Ichi or whatever, you know, you go to the left and you do Gerambarai, then you step forward and you punch, and then you pull your front foot back to behind and do Gerambarai, and then you step forward and punch, right? Almost the same as was a Pinan Shodan, right?
Yep.
I'm sorry, no, not Pinan Shodan. Pinan Nidan.
Or Heian Shodan, yep.
Heian Shodan, depending on whatever, that kata.
Yep.
So, but when you think about it, when your right foot is in the front and then you pull your right foot back behind you, the position that you end up in, that you're allegedly doing your Gerambarai and to block, let's say a Maigeri, the distance and the timing, you are moving to meet a kick that cannot touch you in your previous position.
Yeah.
Where you're facing the other direction, that person is kicking you, and we talked about center line before. If they're kicking you to trying to attack you, when they execute their kick, it is not physically possible for that kick to touch you. So why are you moving to meet a kick, to stop an attack that can't touch you? Okay. So, but when we try to explain things like that, it becomes, you know, well, that's not how we move. Okay, but the reason that you move doesn't match with the reality of the technique that you're trying to do. You're moving to meet a technique, for example, that cannot touch you. So why do you do that way? Why don't you move differently? Why don't you pretend like the person can actually make contact with you and then try to do your move the way you do it? And maybe you'll realize that you need to move a little bit more efficiently or move differently.
Yeah.
And you can still do your kata.
And how do you, so if you have an athlete who does Shorin-Ryu Shima-Ha Kata in competition, how do they go compared to your standard Shito-Ryu or standard Shotokan, if there is such a thing, you know?
Well, that in and of itself is a whole another topic of conversation.
What is standard Shotokan Kata? But yeah.
So right now, I have one athlete who is my direct personal student who does predominantly our Shima-Ha Kata. And I would say that they are about 95% stylistically accurate. I've made, I wouldn't say changes. I've tweaked it just a little bit for competition. And the best example of that is the way we do shito-uke.
Yep.
So when there's a move that has to be done in shito-uke, then I have them do it, what I would say is the Shito-Ryu way of doing shito-uke, which is just slightly different. And so within the confines of that, there is a little bit of variation. But I'm also very clear with them that this is what we do for competition. But in the dojo or regular training, your regular Shima-Ha or Shorin-Ryu practice needs to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
So, but the reality is I also try to minimize that as much as possible, because I believe that it's not so much the style or the kata. I believe it's the execution of the kata that is. And so, and I'll give you, again, another example from competition, who in a previous competition didn't do very well and made a comment on their social media about how it was their style that the judges don't score favorably, and complaining about why people from this style don't win or don't score. And my response to that type of thing is do better.
Yeah.
Just do better, because it's false. Because one of the medalists in the Olympics was from that same style, did that same type of kata, and they won.
Yeah.
Somebody from that style, that same athlete, won a continental championships. Somebody from that style got second place in the All Japan Championships last year. And so it's not about style, it's about execution. And people who blame it on style need to do better.
So if it's based on execution, what are things that people aren't doing good enough or well enough, or too big, too small? Thank you for listening to Karate Over Coffee. And if you're enjoying the podcast and getting something out of the episodes, there are a few things you can do to help us. If you don't already subscribe to us on YouTube, please do so. We release these episodes every Friday morning, Australian time. Plus, we release some smaller espresso shots during the week on both our YouTube channel and our Facebook community group. You can also subscribe to us on our Apple or Spotify. Leaving a 5-star review will be very beneficial as well. If you have any suggestions or topics or feedback or anything that you want to talk about, please put it in our comment section on our Karate Over Coffee community Facebook group. If you'd like to support us, please visit our online shop where we have official Karate Over Coffee shirts, hoodies and mugs available. Your continued support is appreciated and a vital way for the podcast to keep moving forward. Thanks, guys.